Good morning. I'm Rachel Maskell and a member of Labour's front bench team and will be chairing today. May I welcome you all to York and to York College, an outstanding college and a centre of excellence. We gather in the wake of tragic events that occurred in London and recognise how all in politics have a role to make our world a more secure and safe place to live, including here in the UK. Our thoughts are very much with the families of those who were injured and killed on Friday, and we honour members of the public and our emergency services who put themselves in harm's way to save others. The very worst of actions were overridden by the very best of responses, to which we have sincere gratitude. It is without coincidence that we meet to discuss Labour's international agenda here in York. Not only is the city famed for its historic international trade links and being a centre of pilgrimage, today we see 7 million visitors from across the world come to experience the cultural and heritage offer of York. York is the UK's first and only human rights city, where we not only look to the human rights of those around the world, but also to those who live here in York. As a city of sanctuary, it is our honour to draw on our best traditions to welcome refugees and provide the support to those in need. The University of York uniquely supports global human rights defenders through its Centre of Human Rights, inviting those who are working in the front line in some of the most challenging places in the world to come here. The university provides a space for academic reflection before defenders return to the field, and I am pleased to welcome some of our current human rights defenders here today. They, like us in the Labour Party, understand that our international focus must change. In a world of risk, conflict and failed politics, we feel more divided and more insecure. However, there have been voices in our political system which have not only made astute analysis on how we have fallen into this fractious world, but have long called for a different approach. Jeremy Corbyn has led that charge. He has made the difficult calls. He has made the right choices. He has set a vision of a different kind of world and has determined that our international relations must change to secure a better future for our climate, for stability and for peace. I am proud that the Labour Party is led by someone who is prepared to speak out against injustice, to speak truth to power. He will be a Prime Minister who will not follow the wrong paths that have brought so much harm, but resolve to build bridges in the pursuit of peace and stability. Jeremy Corbyn has the determination to refocus our diplomatic priorities and build a secure world for future generations. It is my honour to welcome him to address you today.
Can I say a very big thank you to all of you for coming this morning, a big thank you to York College for giving us the space this morning, and a big thank you to the people of York for making the city what it is, a place of sanctuary, a place of refuge and a place of peace, and also the work that the university does in its human rights department and supporting and looking after human rights defenders, and I thank them for that. And as one who lives within a literally almost sight of the building occupied by Freedom from Torture in my constituency, I recognise the huge work that's done by many voluntary sector organisations in looking after people going through stress and difficulty. I also want to thank Rachel for her work as the MP, her work in Parliament and her work of bringing sense and justice to all issues that she faces, and she's an absolutely fantastic member of Parliament, and I look forward to working with her in the next Parliament when I know she'll be elected again to represent this wonderful city. And I welcome our candidate for York Outer, Anna Perrott, who's here today, who I look forward to working with also in the next Parliament in a majority Labour government. So that York will have double the size of its voice in Parliament for peace, justice and human rights. You're welcome, Anna. I also want to thank our Shadow Defence Secretary, Neil Griffiths, for being here today. Neil has done a splendid job, and Neil has drawn attention to the way in which so many of our armed forces are treated. Because when the parade's over, when the bunting's put away, when the brass band has packed up and gone home, too many of our serving soldiers and others in the armed forces then go back to inadequate accommodation and all the stress that goes with it. And ex-service people often face lives of difficulties and loneliness. Neil has drawn attention to all of this and drawn up an excellent Armed Forces Charter by the Labour Party, which will bring them decent pay and decent conditions and secure housing rather than being thrown into the ravages of the private rented sector. So I want to say a huge thank you to Nia for the work that she's done on that and the patience and listening to a very large number of people, often in very difficult circumstances. Nia, thank you very much for what you've done and said on this. This is the third time during a general election campaign that we have witnessed an horrific terrorist attack on the people of our country. And it seems clear, actually, on our democratic process itself. We're not going to allow our democratic process to be derailed by these kind of terrible incidents. My heart goes out to the families and the friends of those who lost their lives in such an appalling act of terror, to the injured and to all those in shock at what they witnessed on London Bridge on Friday. We all owe a debt of gratitude to our emergency services, to the incredibly brave police officers who put their own lives on the line to save others, and to all of our emergency service workers, ambulance, fire crews, and so many others who were involved in responding to this incident with such speed and such incredibly professional approach to their jobs. And again, we saw the extraordinary bravery from members of the public who ran towards the attacker and put themselves in harm's way to prevent him doing more harm to others. You are an example to us all, and we all give you our very deepest thanks and gratitude. At times like this, we all feel hurt by this appalling crime. And we feel anger that it was carried out on our streets in the heart of our community. I had a very personal experience of this with the attack in Finsbury Park 2 years ago, when a man coming home from a mosque was killed by a far-right extremist driving his van into the crowd and killed Makram Ali. Our local community responded by coming together in support of Makram, his family, and all faiths. People from the synagogue, from the churches, the temples and the mosques all came together in solidarity with Makram's family. When we learn of the distress to others, we cannot help but share a fraction of their pain. And those individual strands of compassion before the ties that connect us to one another become those ties. It is now more than ever that we must come together in our communities. That is solidarity, and it's central to everything that we believe in. In the aftermath of an outrage such as we saw on Friday, people have a right to know from political leaders what steps they will take to ensure public safety. I will always do whatever is necessary and effective to keep our people safe. First of all, the police who put themselves on the line to protect us will have the authority to use whatever force is necessary to protect and save life. If police believe an attacker is wearing a suicide vest, then they're right to take the action that they do and did. We have to understand that no government can prevent every attack. No one would believe any political leader who said they could. But the government can act to make such acts of terror less rather than more likely. It's our duty to look calmly and seriously at what we need to do to give people real security. Our public services are the glue that bind our whole society together. Community policing, the probation service, the mental health service, youth services and social services all have a vital part to play in this, as does our education service. When those public services are cut back, as they have been during the past decade of austerity, they leave behind huge gaps. And that can lead to missed chances to intervene in the lives of people who go on to commit absolutely inexcusable acts. So whether it's during their childhood, their first brush with the law, their first conviction, or in prison through rehabilitation programs. Take the probation service. Part privatised in 2014, resulting in disaster. A disaster that was predicted by the Select Committee at the time. The most serious cases stayed in a justice system badly undermined by austerity cuts. A failure to recruit has left huge staffing shortfalls, with staff supervising more cases than ever expected, posing again a serious risk to our security. You can't keep people safe on the cheap. Real security doesn't only come from strong laws and intelligence, it also comes from effective public services and that they have the funding that they need. Real security demands more than a correct operational decisions by trained and properly funded professionals. It requires political leadership as well. For far too long, our country's leaders have made the wrong calls on our security. Their mistakes in no way absolve terrorists of blame for their murderous actions. The blame for those lies with the terrorists, their funders, and their recruiters. But if we are to protect people, we must be honest about what threatens our security. The threat of terrorism cannot and should not be reduced to questions of foreign policy alone. But too often the actions of successive governments have fueled, not reduced, that threat. 16 years ago, I warned against the invasion and occupation of Iraq. I said it would set off a spiral of conflict, of hate, of misery and desperation that would fuel the wars and the conflict and the terrorism and the misery of future generations. It did, and we are still living with the consequences today of that decision in 2003. I was also one of the few in Parliament who warned against the NATO-led intervention in Libya in 2011. Britain should not have joined that conflict, which has, as a result, created a vast, ungoverned space that's contributed to the misery in the region and made us less safe here in this country and indeed many other parts of Europe. The war on terror has manifestly failed. Britain's repeated military interventions in North Africa and the wider Middle East, including Afghanistan, have exacerbated rather than resolved the problems. Now, we risk being dragged into a further conflict with Iran on the side of the Saudi regime, which is itself an enemy of human rights and prolonging a desperate humanitarian crisis in Yemen, interfering in its neighbours' affairs and murdering journalists. This policy has not made us one bit safer. If anything, it has made us less safe. So, Labour will stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia for use in Yemen and work to end the war. And work to end the war there, not actively support it, as the Conservative government has done. And we will press for action to end human rights abuses both in Saudi Arabia and in Iran, which also has a very bad record on human rights. And we will also support the UN Human Rights Binding Treaty to enforce accountability for human rights abuses perpetrated by corporations around the world as well as by governments. I've had a lot of experience of working with formerly the Human Rights Commission, now the Human Rights Council. And it's improved, and their right to send inspectors has improved, but it needs to be strengthened, and a Labour government will work alongside the UN Human Rights Council to try and help bring justice to those people that have been denied it all around the world. And I'm proud of what our manifesto says in this respect. Real security requires calmly making the right calls at moments of high pressure, often against the grain of conventional wisdom. That requires the courage and strength to chart an independent course when we think our friends and allies are doing the wrong thing. So it is time for Britain to stop clinging to Donald Trump's coattails. Boris Johnson has been the world's leading sycophant towards the president, from climate change denial to unconditional support for Israel's far right, from racism to confrontation with China. Too many times we've been taken on a dangerous path by this process. Britain must make its own foreign policy, not from knee-jerk subservience to another administration which doesn't accept our values. And neither should we ignore the evidence of Russian oligarchs and their money being used to try and buy influence into our politics. So I asked Boris Johnson today, in what I hope will be one of his final acts as Prime Minister, to release the report we know has been cleared by the security services. What has he got to hide? And it's the Conservatives who still refuse to release the report into Saudi funding of extremist groups in Britain. Given the horror of Friday's events and the continuing terror threat, it's simply unacceptable that this report is not in the public domain. Under Labour, Britain will have its own voice in the world, standing tall for security, peace and justice. That's the path to real security. Our foreign policy will be defined by our commitments to human rights, international justice and peace, not enthusiasm for wars that fuel rather than combat terrorism and insecurity. We will introduce a War Powers Bill to Parliament to ensure that no Prime Minister can bypass our democracy when huge questions of going to war or not arise. As things stand, the Prime Minister has the power to launch military action without consulting Parliament. I will be a very different kind of Prime Minister, one who's prepared to limit my own power in the public interest and empower Parliament to hold our government to account. That is a real democracy in operation, and I will be proud to bring about those changes. Of course, our relationship with Europe and the need to bring an end to 3 years of Tory failure over Brexit and get Brexit sorted by giving people the final say on a good deal will continue to be at the heart of Labour's foreign policy and new internationalism. But that also includes a strong role for the Council of Europe, the only international body which includes the whole of Europe and Russia as the custodian of the European Convention and the European Court of Human Rights, which we fully support and adhere to. Because those conventions made after the Second World War are so essential to not only our rights, but the rights and aspirations of people to get the human rights they deserve all around the world. We're determined to work at the heart of the United Nations and of the Commonwealth to promote conflict resolution, promote women's rights, and promote human rights. And that means building support for democratic reform in the United Nations itself. And in NATO, we will work for the alliance to reduce tensions in Europe and beyond. That should be the focus of this week's summit in London. President Macron is right to press the case for change in the direction of NATO, including the need to de-escalate the conflict with Russia and a wider perspective on the most serious issues and threats to our common security. And a Labour government will actively lead multilateral efforts as part of our obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to work for nuclear disarmament and ultimately a nuclear-free world. The threats to global security in the 21st century, including the horrific climate and environmental crisis and the conflicts that it can trigger, as well as the huge scale of global inequality, which means, in blunt terms, 26 billionaires now own the world's wealth, or most of it. And the movements of people across the world, with more refugees and displaced people than at any time since the Second World War, demand a new response. There are now 65 million refugees and displaced people around the world, stretching from the shores of Europe to Bangladesh, where the Rohingya people have sought safety from persecution in Myanmar, and the huge refugee flows driven by poverty and inequality in Latin America, as well as those I've referred to in Libya and Syria and Lebanon. I look forward next year to hosting the UN Climate Conference in Britain, where a British Labour government will lead the campaign to go much further than the Paris Accords of 2015, historic as they were. Because at the moment, Britain is not set to meet its targets of net zero until 2099, and the rest of the world even later. We have to act now, which is why our manifesto puts the green industrial revolution absolutely at its heart. To help settle conflict and promote human rights and in our trade and aid policies, as well as foreign policy, and deliver ambitious global climate agreements, Labour's internationalism means we will create a peace and conflict prevention fund and invest an extra 400 million to expand our diplomatic capacity and increase our oversight of arms exports to ensure we're not fueling conflicts in Yemen or anywhere else in the Middle East. Labour stands behind the international consensus of a genuine two-state solution, a secure Israel alongside a secure and viable state of Palestine. That's why Labour supports an end to the half-century of occupation and the illegal settlements, and we will recognise the state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel. I think all of us want to feel proud of the role our country plays in the world. Our standing on the world stage and the resources at our disposal means we have an enormous capacity to be a force for international solidarity and peace, which is why we will commit 100 million more to United Nations peacekeeping operations around the world. And when I speak to members of the armed forces, as Neera and I have done on many occasions, I talk to those that were asked to go to West Africa as volunteers to deal with the Ebola crisis. I've talked to members of the Royal Navy who plucked drowning refugees from the Mediterranean, and they told me how proud they are of what they achieved and said it was some of the greatest moments of their lives, the way they were able to save lives of people in a desperate situation. So I'm proud that in April 2020, a Labour government will deliver a 5% pay rise to our armed forces and, as we will, to all public sector workers. And in the summer, I spoke to veterans of the D-Day landings on the 75th anniversary commemorations. It's a truly humbling experience. They told me of the horror, the fear, and the terror they faced that day. That generation of men and women showed unimaginable heroism, laid down their lives to defeat fascism in Europe. I have huge faith and confidence in our people's spirit and commitment to decency, fairness, and community. It's our country. That's why Labour is on your side. I'm patriotic about the people of this country. Patriotism is about supporting each other, not attacking somebody else. It's about caring. It's about caring for the whole of society, for all our people, and not walking by on the other side when they need help and support. It's about loving your country enough to make it a place where nobody is homeless or hungry, held back or left behind. And on the international stage, it's about standing up for the values we share of justice, human rights and democracy, and working with others to keep people safe by ending conflict and tackling the climate emergency. I want us to be proud of all the work we do around the world. That's the kind of country we all want to live in. That's the kind of government I want to lead. That is real security. That is real change. Thank you very much. You take the question. Give him three, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for setting out such a vision for the future, not only of our international relations, but for the kind of world that we all long to live in. Now, I'm going to take a small number of questions from you today, which Jeremy will respond to. I'll take them in batches of 3. So the first question, let's see some hands. And I know that Betty from Nigeria, one of our human rights defenders, would like to ask the first question. Betty, do you want to stand up?
Thank you very much. Honourable Corbyn, the future Prime Minister of the UK. Thank you very much. I'm a journalist from Nigeria and a human rights defender, currently a visiting fellow at the University of York. My questions will be around the continuous clampdown on freedom of expression in Nigeria and the risk that journalists like me face. Just last month, the Time International listed Nigeria as one of the 10 countries where journalists are being threatened, and Nigeria featured somewhere around the bottom. And I really think that as a journalist, with the reality on ground, that we should have been on top of that list. This is one of the hardest times to be a journalist in Nigeria. As we speak, so many journalists are being detained indefinitely. Some have enforced disappearances where the government cannot explain what happened to them. What are their crimes for speaking out against injustice, against corruption, against nepotism, for speaking truth to power and asking for accountability? And we don't feel so much of the response from the UK government because Nigeria is a strategic partner to the UK in Africa. And we feel that if you're concerned about human rights, there should have been some form of response. But we've not felt that from the current government, the current UK government. So I would like to ask Honourable Corbyn, as the future UK Prime Minister, what would be your response to this continuous clampdown on freedom of information expression in a country that's supposed to be a democratic government and democratic country, and which is also a strategic partner of the UK in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Diana Magny from Sky News.
What's her name?
Diana Magny.
Mr. Corbyn, to follow on from your comments about President Macron, you have said you agree with him on the brain death of NATO, which he attributed in part to the lack of trustworthiness of the US, and that you would call for new dialogue or a rapprochement with Russia. I wanted to ask how you go about strengthening the alliance, given the fact that you have questioned our membership of it in the past, and whether you accept that any perceived weakness in NATO is a strategic benefit to President Putin. And also, which foreign leader would you visit first?
Thank you.
So which?
Foreign Minister.
Oh.
You visit first. And Antonio Guerrero from La Repubblica.
Hello, Mr. Corbyn. As Donald Trump is coming to London tomorrow, and he said nasty things about you in the past. You boycotted him when he came last time to London. If you become the new Prime Minister, would you go to meet Donald Trump? I mean, and how do you imagine the relationship between the UK led by yourself and the United States led by Donald Trump? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take some more questions shortly, but Jeremy.
I'll deal with those three first. Thank you very much. I'll take them in the order in which they were asked. Betty, thank you very much for your question. And I'm really pleased you're here in York and working on human rights issues in York. The plight of journalists around the world is actually very, very serious indeed. I'm a member of the National Union of Journalists, as well as my own union, Unison, and I strongly support their work through the International Organization of Journalists around the world. Many often criticize the media and get very angry at the way in which news reporting is done and perceptions or otherwise of bias in the media. And I fully understand all that, and it's reasonable we should do that. But we should also recognize that there are incredibly brave journalists around the world who risk absolutely everything in order to expose corruption, expose abuse of power, expose death squads and death gangs. And I think of journalists that exposed what was happening in El Salvador during the Dirty War in the 1980s and were murdered as a result of it. I think of those brave journalists that did the same in Colombia, that have also exposed abuses in Sri Lanka and in many other parts of the world. And it's to them that we owe a huge debt of gratitude. And so there is a very strong case to say to any government, you have to protect the rights of journalists to investigate what is going on. A free press and the rights... A free press and the right to know are an essential part of a democracy, and that is why I would support what the United Nations has said on that and work with many international organizations on this. I would also say that the issues of human rights in different countries in Africa are serious and huge questions have to be raised. So I would be working with the African Union to support them on a Charter for Human Rights across Africa, to have support for the equivalent legal processes on a continental basis that we have in Europe with the European Court of Human Rights, because that, again, is a way in which a human rights defender, whatever country they're in, can appeal to an international body to grant them their safety and their security. And I'd be very pleased to work with human rights organizations all across Africa as a government and seek to support them, but not to interfere in some kind of post-colonial intervention, but just to say the protection of democracy, the protection of independence also requires the protection of the rights of journalists to know and the rights of human rights defenders to go about their business without being put under enormous threat or indeed murdered in the process. So thank you for your question and thank you for the work that you do trying to bring about this in your own country. Thank you for your question concerning NATO. The NATO summit takes place in London this week. and it's obviously a very important occasion. And President Macron has used some colourful language in respect of NATO, but he's right to say that NATO has to assess what its role is. And as I understand it, his views are that there has to be a better understanding with Russia, notwithstanding criticising Russia for its abuses of human rights, but at the same time there has to be an understanding between the NATO countries and Russia, and that, as I understand it, is what he's trying to achieve in NATO. And I would be very happy to meet him and work alongside him in that, because we have to reduce tensions in Europe and not go in the direction of recreating the dangers of the Cold War, which is the direction some people would wish to go. That's being quite serious and quite specific about threats and abuses where they take place, but also trying to bring about that sense of dialogue, which is, I'm pleased to say, beginning to improve. You invite me to say who I'd go and meet first. Well, there's such a wide choice, and it will be Christmas week. But I would have thought a trip to a German market would be a really good idea. And enjoy Christmas there. Because we obviously have to build strong relationships very, very quickly indeed. And the last question about meeting President Trump. Yes, I have made criticisms of President Trump, many criticisms of President Trump. Indeed, he's been good enough to make some of me as well. But that's okay. Yes, of course, we will meet the US administration, as we will meet members of the House and the Senate, and obviously there is a close relationship with the USA, and that is how it will be. And so we will disagree, and I will absolutely not sign a trade treaty with the USA which hands our national health service over to American pharmaceutical companies.
I'll take 3 more questions. If I could start with Aditya Chakraborty from The Guardian.
Mr. Corbyn, earlier today, Boris Johnson also spoke about the London Bridge attacks. He gave an interview to one of the BBC's Andrew Marr, but not the other, Andrew Neil, whom he'd been expected to face. Do you think it's right that the Prime Minister should be able to pick and choose which interviewers he goes in front of? And what action, if any, do you think the Labour Party can take now, to ensure he does go in front of Andrew Neil? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. From the BBC, we've got Frankie McCanley.
Mr. Corbyn, on Friday, London witnessed another terrible attack on the streets. Now, this man was clearly unsafe to be out on the streets. Do you think that he should have been given a tougher sentence along with anyone else that commits a crime like this? And what would you have done differently?
Okay, thank you. And finally, from the Yorkshire Post, Robin Vinter.
Mr. Corbyn, given how many marginal seats there are in the region and how much time both you and Boris Johnson have been spending here, would it be fair to say that Yorkshire could decide this election?
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Before the election campaign kicked off, there were talks between the broadcasting organisations and the political parties to ensure there was a process of public debate and there was equal time given on the broadcast media to us. And the broadcasting rules in an election are very, very important, where there has to be equality of time and opportunity between the major parties in the broadcast message during the election. And that is very, very important. And we are absolutely monitoring it very, very closely to make sure that it's carried out very fairly indeed. And I agreed to take part in one-to-one debates with the Prime Minister. We've had one performed by ITV, and there's another one coming up on the BBC. We also agreed as part of that package that all the party leaders would be subject to an interview with Andrew Neil. I had my interview with Andrew Neil. The other party leaders have had similar interviews, but the Prime Minister decided not to do so. I think it's very strange when the Conservative Party seems to be wanting to avoid debate and avoid interview, set up fake news organisations that purport to be coming from different political parties, including on the day that we launched our manifesto, setting up some fake website which was commenting on our manifesto and turning their own organisation into one that was apparently called Fact Check in order to undermine a very reputable organisation called Fact Check. I don't mind political debate. I'm very happy to debate our National Health Service, our Education Service, our housing policy, any policy. I'm very happy to debate with other parties. That is what an election is all about. But don't go around playing these stupid games of trying to bring out false information purporting to come from somebody else. This is what brings politics and democracy into disrepute. And we will carry on with the campaign, and I'm looking forward to the debates to come in this election campaign. On the question about the attacks that took place in London, they're horrific, obviously, in every way, and the person who perpetrated them had been in prison and was released apparently half sentence, as is possible under existing law. I've asked for an inquiry into everything surrounding him, his sentence, and what happened to him in prison and what supervision order he was on afterwards. I think we have to be careful that in the event of an atrocity, we don't bring in knee-jerk legislation, because that can itself pay a price much later on. I think of 1974, the Prevention of Terrorism Act was brought in. It didn't help to bring about peace in Ireland. It probably made the situation worse because of the draconian nature of it. But, and this is an important part of it, when somebody is convicted of plotting a terrorist outrage, as this person was, or commits one, then clearly, when they're in prison, they have to be under supervision. Clearly, they have to be in a secure place, and clearly there has to be a program of trying to de-radicalize them. I want to know what actually happened in prison. I want to know what kind of psychological assessments were made before he was allowed for release, why the parole board was apparently not involved in the decision for his release, and also what role the probation service, underfunded and broken up as it is because of privatisation, was able to perform in monitoring his behaviour and his movements after coming out of prison. Because the priority has to be to keep people and the community safe. That is the point of a criminal justice system, that's the point of prison, that's the point of rehabilitation, that's the point of a probation service. But when you overcrowd the prisons, underfund the staff, have a shortage of staff in prison, have, in some cases, 23-hour lockups in prison of other people, you're not making anybody safe in the end. You're not making our society safer. You're not addressing those issues. As I said in my speech, you can't have security on the cheap. And so we will properly fund our prison service. We will properly make sure that prison officers are able to work in a safe way, but also undertake the education and rehabilitation work which has to be part of our prison process. But I would also say that if somebody has committed a very serious, very dangerous offence, then there has to be a lot of thought and a lot of caution before they're released, including, as I said, psychological assessments of their danger before they come out and very close monitoring of them to make sure there isn't an ever-present threat to all of us, as there clearly was in this particular case. And lessons are best learned by the examination of all of the facts surrounding it, but also recognise that if we want to live in safety, we have to fund our public services properly. The other point I made was about the breeding ground for all of this, the breeding ground in the wars, the breeding ground of people that are unsupported in our society and our lives. If we don't fund our public services properly, if we don't fund our education and our youth services and our social services, our mental health services, our NHS properly, at the end of the day, we all pay a price for that. And so let's learn a lesson from this. And thank you for your question from the Yorkshire Post. I'm always happy to be in Yorkshire. I love Yorkshire, it's absolutely fine, and I'm looking forward to leading a Labour government that will set up a national investment bank, that will have regional transformation funds, that will properly fund transport infrastructure in Yorkshire, in the North East and the North West, and develop a new crossrail for the North. And however people voted in the referendum of 2016, I simply say this. We cannot go on forever debating how people voted in 2016. We have to go forward. We have to protect our trading relationship with Europe, which is why we will negotiate quickly an agreement to leave the EU with that trade arrangement, which will also protect the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, and put that alongside Remain in a choice before the people of this country within 6 months of taking office. My job will be the honest broker in this to make sure it happens and carry out that decision when it is finally made. To me, that is sensible, intelligent, grown-up politics. So we can then get on with the very important job of ending austerity, of investing in education, in health, in housing, of giving hope to young people in our society, of the green industrial revolution that will bring the high-paid, skilled jobs here in Yorkshire, in the North East, in the North West, high-paid, secure jobs that will also help to protect our environment. We're going to be a very serious government in dealing with poverty and injustice and inequality in this country, and in dealing with the needs for investment all across this country. And on the world stage, a government that's absolutely serious about confronting the real huge issues that face this planet. Climate change, huge gap between rich and poor, the millions who grow up in desperate poverty, and the millions of children that don't get the education they need and deserve. How many geniuses are there wasting their lives away in shanty towns all over the world because they don't get the chance to go to school, they don't get the chance to eat properly, they don't get the chance to grow and develop in the way that we want all of our children to do. We can't solve all of the world's problems from one government, but we can be a government that on the world stage will want to solve those problems and not run away in fear from them.
Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming to Yorkshire to make such an important statement today.
When are we seeing the Railway Museum?
Well, we'll go there next maybe. But it's fantastic you all coming here and putting your questions, but also on hearing Labour's real vision for a different kind of society that we can live in a different world in which we can aspire to. So thank you, and thank you, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you so much.